Good morning. I'm Lottie Beebe, and I'd like to welcome you here this morning for the Educator Effectiveness Committee meeting. And I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have asked Ms. Abby to do roll call, please.
Yes, Ms. Beebe.
Here.
Ms. Lottie Beebe present. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett absent. Ms. Bothy.
Here.
Ms. Bothy present. Ms. Bradford.
Here.
Ms. Bradford present. Ms. Dastu.
Here.
Ms. Dastu present. Mr. Garvey. Mr. Garvey absent. Mr. Gio.
Here.
Mr. Gio present. Ms. Hill. Ms. Hill absent. Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Lee present. Ms. Orange Jones. Mr. Orange Jones absent. Mr. Romer.
Here.
Mr. Romer present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Bridget, are there any consent items?
We are adding 2 items to the consent agenda today. They are items 2.4 on page 7 and item 2.5 on page 9. And that is your entire consent agenda.
Move approval.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, we have approved the consent agenda. The next item?
Your next item is item 2.1 on page 1, a consideration of approval of an educational leader program at Southern University and A&M College. The department recommendation is to approve.
Okay. Do I
I'll
have
make a motion to approve, but I do have a question.
Okay, do we have a second? Second. Okay, discussion, Ms.
Is there
Dastu?
somebody to hear the answer question? Well, then I can ask my question offline.
Just out of, are we supposed to be seeing items on the screen in front of us as they come up?
I believe that we have lost the internet connection.
Okay.
I am working on it, and I apologize.
Okay.
We just cut you off. I see on purpose.
Do you, is that right? I was waiting for when my access was going to be cut off.
So, do we have someone to address your question?
I'm supportive of the recommendation. I'll ask my question after the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 2.2 on page 3, a consideration of approval of a teacher education program at McNeese State University. The department recommendation is to approve.
Move approval.
Move, a motion, second.
Second.
Okay, motion and second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 2.3 on page 5, a consideration of approval of teacher education programs at Xavier University of Louisiana. The department recommendation is to approve.
Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Well, I should have asked, is there any discussion? None? Okay, any opposition? Hearing none, we move.
Okay, your next item is item 3.1 on page 11, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel, Section 411, School Nurse. The department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Okay, so we need a motion,
I so moved.
a second. Okay, any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Any opposition? Okay, let's move to the next item.
The next item is 3.2 on page 13, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 746, Louisiana Standards for State Certification of School Personnel, Section 505, CTTIE1 and CTTIE2 certificates. The department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Okay, we need a motion.
I'll move to approve as notice of intent.
Second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion on this item?
No, I like it.
No? Okay, hearing none, all in favor? Okay, any opposition? Okay, the next item.
Okay, the next item is 3.3 on page 15, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 130, regulations for the evaluation and assessment of school personnel, Regarding policy related to the implementation of the Compass evaluation system, the department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
Okay, so we need a motion.
So move.
Second. Ms. Bradford seconds. Now for the discussion.
Yes, I have a question on page 19 about the training for the teachers.
Okay, do we have someone from the department to answer the questions, or you're prepared?
I'll speak to the questions, and then if we have Molly Horseman here and Molly, if you want to come up and answer questions as well, that's fine.
So my question is about the training, and one of the things that I want us to be thoughtful of is the teacher's time. And so I realize for the first few years while we're putting this into place that our teachers will need to be trained, because I expect that we're going to have some updates from year to year that we'll be refining the process. But the question is really, do we need to put it in policy that we will train everyone every year, or once we have this system in place, would we expect our teachers to spend the time in that training annually?
Well, I think that we're thinking that there will be initial training, and we're planning on doing kind of informational training over the course of the next month that will move to district-specific support in May, and then we'll do trainings over the summer of administrators, so that in-depth training, so that when teachers come back for in-service in August, they'll be ready to be trained then. But I think from that point on, our view is that we really want to move toward the day-to-day work of the school being the venue for ongoing training. And so whether it's cluster, whether it's grade level teams, whether it's departments meeting, that then becomes the venue for both Common Core standards adoption as well as for training on our rubric, for example. And that our network teams will be organized to support that, but that really is the district's prerogative as to how we do that. Now, I do think that in ongoing years on that same schedule, like we'll be wanting to do ongoing webinars so that new teachers who come on can be prepared, new administrators can be prepared. We can do that easily because it doesn't cost anything to maintain that webinar, obviously. And then over the summers, I think we will want to continue to do training. But I guess our view is that rather than wanting to pull people out for training over the course of the year, we really don't want to do that. We just want to help districts work within the structures that they already have to have their teachers acquire the new standards.
Okay. So what will this policy do as far as training is concerned? Are our teachers going to be put in a room every year, even if the system hasn't been refined at all? Are they going to be hearing the same presentation from year to year in their schools? Are we just saying if you need updated training, if we've refined the system, or if you're maybe new to the school, then we would want to make sure you have that training?
Yeah, I mean, we have a train-the-trainer model where we're training the administrators and district officials to provide that training to their teachers. So I think we would be working with those. The state would be working with those people specifically. But yes, on an ongoing basis, we will provide training of a variety of kinds on the Common Core and so on as well. But I do want to emphasize that we view our work about supporting districts in doing the ongoing work of teacher improvement and development, rather than that every year we're going to roll out a new kind of training. We want to equip administrators to do that ongoing work, but we don't plan to do a new rollout on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask any other board members to have questions.
I had a question. On the Chapter 7, reporting and monitoring, were the items that were deleted, are they just an effort to streamline the reporting by the districts? Was that something that came as a recommendation from the pilots?
Yes. So there were a number of recommendations around just process. So, for example, there were deadlines that were interim deadlines over the course of the year that didn't, every district has a different calendar.
Like the June to August?
Exactly,
deadline?
yeah.
Okay.
And so it made reporting somewhat awkward. Similarly, districts sometimes lacked clarity as to the fact that a principal could designate people to administer the observations and populate the evaluation form. Those are examples of process that we're attempting to clarify. We also found that in the rubric itself for observing teacher practice, there weren't clear distinctions between the highest level and the second to highest level, and people were kind of left saying, I'm not sure I totally understand the difference between highly effective and accomplished, and that by sharpening the language and by simplifying the rubric, we can help them. And finally, there were 11 components of the rubric that we used in the pilot. We have proposed just to have 5 on this. And then, over time, if districts want to use their own components, they're more than welcome to add to it. If over time, for some reason, as a state, this board feels like it's better to add back components, we can do that, but better to keep it simple, less time-consuming for staff.
Okay. I have another question. I see that the districts have the ability to put forth a proposed alternate observation tools. Based on the conversations you've had with the pilot districts, do you anticipate that districts will want to do that, or do you anticipate the majority will use
I think the majority
The one
will
that we're
use
approving.
Danielson because it is a nationally normed or nationally used research-based rubric that comes with resources that they will benefit from over time. So as that organization evolves, they'll provide resources and already are developed specifically for the Common Core. For example, they're developing resources right now that align what English teaching specifically should look like in connection with the Common Core. So my sense is that the majority will. Where we've gotten questions, and I would, Mr. Lee might be able to speak to this, is those districts that are really deep into TAP implementation. And obviously DeSoto is one, having just won a national award for its work with TAP. I've gotten inquiries from a couple of other parishes about whether or not using TAP would be something they could do, and we support that entirely if that's something that's becoming
Could a
great
district
practice.
use both, for their TAP schools, use one type of observation, and then for
We'd
their
be fine with that.
non-TAPs?
Fine with that as well.
Use-
Yeah, but I
use
don't
that
know,
one?
is there?
Okay.
No,
And my
it's-
last question has to do with the composite score. I'm sorry.
Before you, because I have a comment to make.
Sure.
And I think if we just kind of work it this
Absolutely.
way.
You're chair.
Superintendent White, you've made reference to, or your question specifically, Ms. Gastu, you asked if other districts or those pilot districts might be interested in using another instrument. I do know from the beginning, it was stated that the concern regarding teacher evaluation was the inconsistency of evaluations across the state. And so I think if we get into the business of saying, look, District A, you can do what you choose to do, and, other districts, you have the autonomy to use the instrument of choice. Because in St. Martin Parish, we have a very effective instrument that we've been using for years. It's a rubric. It has the 4 rankings, the ratings, and but the reason as a pilot district we chose to go with what the state is proposing, or the Department of Ed has proposed, is so that we could maintain that consistency, that continuity. So I just have some great reservations if we're going, now I understand the TAP model, because there are schools in place already, and they're familiar with that instrument. But just to say, to appease some school systems to say, well, you can do what you want and this group can do what they want, I think we need to maintain that consistency. And that is as a personnel director, and I speak quite frequently to my colleagues, and we are the individuals who will be responsible for the most part in districts to implement teacher evaluation programs, the process. So I just want to make sure that we need to maintain that consistency.
Well, but I think if you read the policy, the bar is pretty high, and the evaluation of what they're using is annual. So I think, if you have a few districts that, for whatever reason, they have to really step up and show that they have something that is comparable or is good. I mean, the board has a history of allowing districts. For example, when we did the comprehensive curriculum, we gave districts the ability to be able to, not to develop their own curriculums. Very few did it, and those who embarked on it, I believe, did not complete it. They may have started it in some subjects and then realized the magnitude of the work, and then used the comprehensive curriculum. But I think that if there are 1 or 2 districts out there, for example, at DeSoto, or for some other reason, this policy, I think, has very high standards for what they will use, and it's reviewed annually, as I read it. So I guess I can live with it.
Okay. Mr. Lee?
Of course, I'm more familiar with the TAP model, but I would agree that we need consistency. And just looking at the TAP model in relation to what's being recommended, I think that consistency is there. It's high quality, and I don't see a conflict. Now, I'm not familiar with other type instruments or models or rubrics that other school systems would want to use, but I do think it needs to be high quality, and we need consistency statewide.
I agree.
I would like to speak to that, if
Yes,
I may.
Ms. Bowman?
Although I respect the notion of consistency, and I think that that's really important, I also think that we need to be very careful in what we're asking of our districts, and that we can't ever assume that what we're doing is absolutely perfect, and we need to understand that we have to give our districts some professional leeway. And as a teacher, and then even thinking about the professionals in the districts, if they come to us and they say, we have this system, the system will work better while meeting all of your guidelines, then I would be very reluctant to turn them down. And I'm looking at evaluations across the country, and I'm finding that while we have some states that have state systems, you also have some states with a whole lot of local control where they're able to create these guidelines, and districts are able to create evaluation systems that work for them. So I would be very reluctant to say it's this and only this no matter what.
Well, Ms. Bophy, to respond, the concern I have is that, we have developed a model, and when you have a teacher's livelihood that is dependent on the outcome. So the concern, the situation we're in today is due, in my opinion, because we've had the flexibility among districts to create our own instruments. And if we're truly about getting the results we want, impacting student achievement, I think that we need to comply with what has been presented to us. And like I said, the TAP model is research-based. It's been in place. Certainly, if the standards that we're expected to meet, the Louisiana components of effective teaching, if a district wants to use that, I can agree that they may be allowed to do that. But once again, the whole objective from the beginning was to have consistency and uniformity across the state. Because if a teacher leaves St. Martin Parish and they go to Caddo Parish, there should be equal expectations regarding performance.
I think that's where we disagree. I don't believe that the objective is for consistency. I believe the objective is to put a system in place to where we're giving feedback to our teachers so that they can improve their practice. And Ms. Dastug brought up the comprehensive curriculum earlier. Again, the comprehensive curriculum was put in place so that we could have high quality instruction for our students, but at the same time, when we start saying this is how it has to be done, then we are removing the possibility for people to do it better. So I think our issue is, I don't think that we're doing this for consistency. I believe that we're doing this so that we can inform our teachers so that they can improve their practice.
I would just say that I think probably there's a balance between what both perspectives are, and we're trying to strike it, which is that I think that the consistent standard of rigor needs to be there, and that's why we proposed one model that's nationally normed. On the other hand, if someone has something that's working, it would be foolish to take it away from them if it's working for kids. So we allow, as we do in many of our policies at the board, an exceptions process if something's working and the bar is high. So that's our position.
Ms. Chairman, I had one more question, then I'll give it the floor. On the standards of effectiveness B, on the composite score range, Ms. Schwartzman, I believe, am I correct in saying that the expected sort of range and where teachers will fall will remain about the same? It's just that we've gone from 1 to 5, and we've gone from 1 to 5 to 1 to 4, and we've gone from 5 ratings to 4. So the numbers will fall out essentially about where we expected them to fall out.
The only area in which there's a forced...
When the board approved this earlier.
Yeah, I mean, the only area in which there's a kind of predetermined distribution is on the value-added area where we say the bottom 10%. And as you note, Ms. Dastuke, the bottom 10% or the top 10% have a corollary rating on a 4 scale as they do on a 5 scale. So that doesn't change. But we're not also going to say to districts, you have to have a certain number of people scoring a 3 or you have to have a certain number of people scoring a 2 at the composite.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we made that point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Bopey?
One of the things that I would like to point out to people who are not familiar with using rubrics, when you have 5 places on the rubric, it's really easy to fall in a 3. But when you have 4 places on the rubric, you need to make good decisions about whether you're looking at a 2 or you're looking at a 3. And so a 4 forces you, as opposed to just going with, we'll go with a 3. You have to make good decisions. So that's the advantage of a 4-point rubric. So I think that that's important to keep in mind. Also think another thing we need to keep in mind is that research shows us that there's not a whole lot of difference statistically of our teachers who fall in the middle 80%. So we know we've talked about the bottom 10%, we've talked about the top 10%. Statistically, we do not have a lot of variations in that middle 80%, and so that's why I'm completely comfortable with going on a 4-point rubric as opposed to a 5-point rubric. And I'm really interested in figuring out how we can help everybody move.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bopey. I think, Mr. Lee, you have a comment?
It was a different type question, but I'd have to say I agree with those comments that I don't know why we're changing. I believe the first model was a 5-point model, and that also is in agreement with some of the national models. But so long as there's a crosswalk, I think it'll be okay. But it does appear that the 5-point seemed to fit a little better to me. I wanted you to give us a little bit of information about implementation. I'm talking about a year from now, not this summer, but next summer. I'm hearing discussion about getting teachers evaluated prior to them leaving for the end of the school year and knowing, what their status is before they come back for the fall semester. Can you give us any thoughts about how this is going to work a year from now? Because we need to, of course, I guess I'd have to say to you kind of where I'm headed with this. It looks like we need quicker turnaround with test results. And the only way I know to get it would be electronic testing and electronic results. But maybe you have other thoughts. I'd just like to kind of get you to give us your thoughts about it.
Sure, and I think what you mean, Mr. Lee, is in the rating process. How do we do that when we have some of it at least is contingent on test results. In a year's time, we will set a timeline, and actually the regulations set a proposed timeline for a July 15 completion of the evaluation process. That's the one deadline that we're setting, and that allows time to accommodate the return of test outcomes from students having taken those tests in April, from those results having been processed through the value-added process, if that's applicable, and for then district administrators to create the composite rating for teachers. They should be able to do that in time enough to have a conversation with teachers to end the school year. They will then be required by July 15 to submit that to us. If they have their own process for providing an interim update to teachers sort of at the end of the year to say, here's what your observation outcomes are, now let's wait for the test outcomes, they're of course free to do that. But we want to make sure that by July 15 that rating process is complete so that things coming back for next year can be done. I want to, and this is with all, certainly nothing having to do with my tenure here, with all compliments to George Knoll and Rain Martin and Molly and others, the turnaround that's been established for having an evaluation that uses test outcomes here in Louisiana to get it done that school year as opposed to waiting to the next school year is really uncommon. And, you know, I know from having worked elsewhere, we really struggled with how to turn it around quick enough so that you wouldn't have to wait until next fall, which frankly is what a lot of districts and states are doing, is waiting until the next fall to provide that rating for teachers. So I commend the work that went on previously.
Mr. Lee, just to render a comment to the concern about the 5 ratings, I do know in some of the pilot districts with accomplished and highly effective, some of the principals indicated that it was so close that they were having difficulty, you know, establishing the rating. So Mr. White did listen to those concerns. Are there any other board members with concerns or questions? Because I would like to go through the bulletin, if I may, at this point. And then we do have someone who would like to speak to the issue. On page of my book, you know, I understand that we removed for informal, unannounced, and is there a reason for that, Mr. White?
I'm sorry, which
It's page 16 of the book that we were presented as board members regarding the informal. And I can understand informal, it's generally unannounced, but is there a reason for the strike for unannounced right here? So you're mandated to do at least one formal announced, but then informal, the word unannounced was added, and then it's a strike.
Yeah, I think, and Molly, you can speak to it. I think just our instinct is that rather than creating more specific mandates as to whether or not something should be announced or shouldn't be announced, it really would be up to the school, and just more flexibility. But Molly, is there more background you want to provide?
No, that's right. We realized that the language as it existed led folks to believe that unannounced observations were required to be unannounced, informal observations rather, and as Mr. White said, we just wanted to allow for the flexibility for informal observations to be either announced or unannounced.
Okay, then Molly, I need to direct my next question. On page 17, item C, there was language to address the student learning targets collaboratively. Why would we remove that from the bulletin?
As we've been sharing the information about this policy with district and school leaders, they've had some questions about the extent to which they could standardize targets across the school or district level and work with their teachers to set common targets across teachers of similar assignments. And we realized here that that language may lead folks to believe they had to establish targets at the classroom level rather than use district or school adopted standardized targets, and so we didn't want that language to mislead people in that way.
Okay, I can accept that explanation. Now, I need on page 18, section 309, standards of effectiveness. I need you to clarify item 3, because in the initial bulletin, there was 50-50, the quantitative, qualitative, but it appears here that if you fail one or the other, or you get an ineffective rating, then in essence it's ineffective. But here in item 3 says there's a composite, an average rather, of the two. So could you just elaborate more on this item?
What page are we on?
I'm on page 18, I'm sorry. Section 309.
The law establishes a distinction between a composite score and BESE's authority to determine the ultimate rating. And I think that what you're asking about is the distinction between there being a composite score, but then BESE having the ability to say if someone is ineffective in either of the areas, then the ultimate rating is that they are ineffective overall. And you're right, and this has been obviously much deliberated over the last 2 years, that there is a composite score, and then there is also a rating process, and that those two things are different. Essentially, if someone scores ineffective in one of the two categories, then they are ineffective overall.
So what this is saying, item 3, is that we will average the two, and if it results in an ineffective, then
That that there will be two subscores. So there's the quantitative portion and the qualitative. You average them.
Okay.
However, and that produces your composite score. However, if someone is ineffective in either one of them, their rating is ineffective. So they have a composite score that is the average, but they will be rated ineffective irrespective of that composite score if one of those two subgroups is ineffective.
And why did we go back to LSAT when we went to the leader competency standards, and then now we're back to LSAT? Is there a reason?
The aim there was just to keep our terminology consistent. In adopting a modified version of Danielson's framework, she uses the terminology domains and components similar to the former version of the Louisiana Components of Effective Teaching, so we wanted to just make that
Just
language
to be
consistent.
consistent. Okay, on page 21, and Ms. Astor, you may, no, she's not here. But once again, reporting and monitoring, we're striking items 3, 5, 8, and 9, which I think would be important.
Well, one of the things we heard is that districts were feeling like our reporting requirements were quite onerous. And you know, I have to say that one of the efforts of our administration has been to say, let's reduce red tape. And where there is information that we can be gleaning in other ways, rather than asking districts to create, you know, tons of new reports for us, we said that these would not be required reports.
But going back to law, I think at one point the legislature wanted an accounting of those individuals who exit the profession. So is this going to comply with that law? And particularly when we strike the number of certified and other professional personnel leaving for resignation purposes? I mean, they're resigning or for other personal
Yeah,
reasons?
this will comply with the law. We'll still take in reports of who leaves the profession, for example, absolutely. What this is trying to get at is trying to have districts establish a number of people who leave because they received an ineffective rating or a negative evaluation. And just having done this before, what that will lead to is a very long process around saying, okay, well, did this person leave because of evaluation or not? It will have different standards applied to it from one district to the next because it is somewhat subjective. And you'll end up with a kind of confusing reporting process, and, you know, frankly, governments put school districts through that enough, I think. So we're suggesting that we not have that as a required report.
But the law is still on the books that we do the exit reporting. Am I correct?
Well, this is not about exits. This is about exits for a specific reason. Of course, we still take in reports as to...
So in that law, we will, but technically you have to have the information available.
You have to have the information as to how many people exited the profession. Of course, we have that report generally.
But generally a reason is provided.
A reason is provided, and that's why we have it, so this is redundant. But what this is asking for is a separate report around how many people do you think left because of your evaluation process. And we think that it's just redundant and a little bit cumbersome.
I think that's important, but I'm an individual, so the body will decide. On page 24, why would we strike under administrator, Ms. Molly, why would we strike out the words requires professional certification under the rules of the board when we're dealing with an administrator? So what does this imply? The definition, administrator. On page 24, it appears that certification isn't required if we take out that language.
This is the dean provision, right? So, for example, if you have a person at the school who has an instructional leadership title such as dean, while that person is in a role of instructional leadership, that person is actually not certified in that position. There's not that dean certification. We would want that person still to be defined as someone who receives an evaluation, even though that person is not specifically certified as an instructional leader. That person is a leader of teachers. So we're in essence expanding the evaluation system here by saying it shouldn't only be limited to people who are certified. This does not eliminate people who are certified. In fact, it mandates inclusion of people who are certified, but it adds by saying also people who are not certified as administrative leaders but act in leadership capacities should be evaluated.
And then I take issue with that, but once again, you know, I think those credentials are important, and I've had many people communicate that to me as well.
I just do want to be clear that we're not disputing the importance of that. All we're saying is that the reality is there is not, for example, a certificate for deans, and there are people who act as deans, so we may as well evaluate them as instructional leaders.
So then, with regard to educational leader, then that is someone such as a principal and those who are expected, according to Bulletin 746, to possess those credentials.
And as you see, as under Section 905, it defines educational leader as a person
Exactly.
who's certified.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then I have one other definition, page 26, where once again the certification requirement is struck under teacher, page 26. It says any person who provides direct or indirect instruction to students to whom he or she is formally assigned. However, you would delete whose employment requires professional certification issued under the rules of the board.
Well, not every, again, this is actually expanding the number of people who are evaluated. So while I recognize it looks like it's negating, it's actually expanding, because what you're essentially saying is even though the law does not require that everyone who teaches in our state is certified by this board, that you are actually saying those people still have to be evaluated, even if they're not required to be certified by this board. This is actually more restrictive than it would be if you didn't have it.
Well, these individuals identified here, or some are provided ancillary certificates or licensures, which would be a certification, if you will, or a license.
I think all this is trying to do is establish that not every classroom teacher in public schools in the state is required to have a license by this board. And thus, we are saying that people who teach in our public schools but are not required to have a license shall still be covered by
When
this
did that
evaluation
change?
system. That changed well, to some degree it changed in this legislative cycle, but there have always been requirements to say that certain schools don't have to have every teacher be certified by this board.
I've worked diligently as a personnel director and many others, and I'm not
Chairman,
aware.
I'd like to call the question.
We do have someone to speak to this. Two comment cards, Ms. Dexter.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question? And I think I want to see where this falls in with the discussion that you guys are having. One is about instructional coaches, which, you know, as education continues to evolve, we have different roles that people play in schools. So one, would the instructional coaches be evaluated as teachers, or would they be evaluated as administrators? And then the other question I have about the instructional coaches is, would they have the ability to do observations of teachers to lessen the burden on principals?
So yes, they do have the ability to do observations to lessen the burden on principals, and in fact, we do encourage schools to have those folks trained so they can do that. As in terms of their own evaluation, you'll see that the definition of teacher refers to direct instruction or direct instructional support to students. And so in that sense, an instructional coach might be included in that definition and evaluated as a teacher.
Okay, so with the language here because we don't certify them as instructional coaches as far as I understand, but that we employ people in that capacity, then we would still need to evaluate them. Thank you.
Ms. Beebe?
Yes.
Mr. White, I know that you've worked closely with the pilot districts and the superintendents and the feedback from those districts, and I would assume that these changes have been reviewed with them, or you've had a lot of them have originated out of that discussion. Overall favorable of the changes that are being proposed within the policy from the districts?
Yes, we had a call with them yesterday. I think they agree with the changes that have been made by and large. Of course, it's 10 different groups, so you're going to have some, disagreement in various areas. But I think by and large, the change toward relaxing the process requirements, allowing more flexibility, the change to this specific rubric, I think, has by and large been very favorable. for the clarity and kind of concision of it. So yes, I would say by and large favorable.
Thank you.
And your point around all of them having been gleaned from the pilots, absolutely, all the lessons have been gleaned from the pilots. Yeah.
And Mr. Gia, the discussions I have had is certainly they would like to see uniformity in the process and consistency. But we do have two individuals who have requested to speak. We have Ms. Monica Candle with representing Stand for Children. Ms. Monica, you will have 3 minutes to present. And she wishes to speak in support.
Yes. Good morning. I just wanted to speak. My name is Monica Candel, and I'm the policy analyst for Stand for Children. I wanted to thank you all for considering teacher feedback in this process and in the changes that have been made to the bulletin. Throughout the legislative session, I've had the opportunity to work with teachers and parents from Baton Rouge, from New Orleans, Shreveport, other areas across the state. And so we firmly believe that the changes that y'all are recommending will make Compass stronger. And again, we want to thank the State Superintendent John White and BESE for considering incorporating this feedback. Our teachers deserve meaningful feedback as soon as possible, and our students deserve effective teachers as will be identified by this system. So thank you all for your time, for your attention to educator feedback, and for the work that you do for the kids in Louisiana.
Thank you, Ms. Candle. Any questions? Any board members? Okay, thank you. Okay, next we have Mr. Lee Meyer representing the Assumption Parish School Board. He wishes to speak in opposition. And Mr. Meyer will have to say 3 minutes, please, sir.
Yeah, but she only used one. Can I have her too?
No, we're going to stick to the rules. Thank you.
All right, my name is Lee Meyer. I'm with the Assumption Parish School Board. I've listened to your discussion this morning, and I can see that there are going to be a lot of discrepancies coming out, and especially if we've got to worry about a teacher being evaluated before July the 15th, and they're going to have to meet with their principals and told that they're ineffective and they're going to lose their salary for a little while. You're going to see a lot of lost time as far as being able to appeal those. And Ms. Buffy, I wonder if, and I'm not allowed to ask questions, so I'm just saying you were Teacher of the Year, and I'm wondering how many people you believe are going to be able to pass this evaluation process when you're put in the same level of accountability on the child's improvement and the evaluations. I went through the TAP. I earned an additional $1,500 for having my children get high scores, and I lost out on the observations. Now, which one's more important to you? The child or some teacher or principal walking in there and saying, you didn't have your objective on the board correctly. I saw one child over there chewing gum you missed. I watched a child sleeping that you didn't bother to wake up. You didn't call on that other child, or you didn't give him the proper amount of time to answer a question. Ms. Buffy, I think you remember those days. You close the door and you teach children. And if those test scores improve and you're doing the job that you're supposed to do, and you're going to have a 50-50 chance of becoming even effective, we're losing something there, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to lose teachers. They're going to start resigning at the end of this school year. The school teachers that are brand new are going to be disillusioned by everything that's going on, because we don't care if they can teach. We really don't, according to this consideration up there. We don't really care if they can teach. We're just worried about getting rid of that 10% so that we can fill them with Teach for Americas. And I said it. So what I'm interested in is if that child, his performance, and that teacher brought that performance up, and they're going to be deemed ineffective, I think we're going to have a lot of lawsuits on our hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer.
If I could just add, Madam
Yes.
Chairman, a comment in respect to Mr. Meyer. I think he raises, while I don't agree with most of what he says, I think he raises one valid concern, and that is that if someone makes high gains, and for whatever reason their principal exhibits bias against them or something and rates them low on their observation, Actually, as I'm sure Mr. Meyer has read in the law, the recent amendments to the law make clear that teacher can request outside team of observers to come in and validate that principal actually made an accurate observation to make sure that it's a fair system. And so I respect the comment about if a teacher makes gains, we should provide that teacher the benefit of the doubt on their observation, and thus I'm happy that the legislature has acted to change that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. White. And again, this item is to be put out for notice of intent, but I do have an observation or a question for you, Mr. White. How long does it take, and I'm assuming it's about a 3-month process, and then if there are challenges to the document, so I need you to respond. How long does it take, would you estimate?
I'm sorry, how long does what take?
The notice of intent and getting this, the changes, the revisions approved.
Ms. Posniak, maybe you want to answer that.
Hi, Catherine Posniak. I'm the Executive Director for BESE, and this is actually a process that our office runs, and so we need to advertise this notice of intent for 90 days.
And
the
technically,
public
if
comment
there's a
period is for
challenge,
30.
if there's a challenge to any of this, then what happens?
Sure. So we take the board takes public comment for the first 30 days that the item is advertised. And if public comment is received, that will come back before the board, and the board will consider this again for final adoption.
Okay, so do we have enough time to get this approved before the actual evaluation process begins?
Yes. So, I'm sorry, if we're in April, June, we would see this happen in mid to late fall.
So that could be...
The implementation, this would become rule in mid to late fall.
But once again, we start August, the observation.
Madam Chair, I think there's existing policy that the board has approved,
Correct.
that will be operated under until this new policy is adopted.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so we do have a motion and a second.
Madam
you
Chairman.
have...
Yeah, I had a question for the superintendent. You addressed an issue that was concerning me too, about a teacher that is effective on the results of the test, but maybe graded as ineffective by the principal. You said that there's an appeals process and that was added late in the legislative process. What is the appeals process? Who is on the appeals board? Isn't it 3 people? Can you remind me? How does it work? One is picked by the principal?
Well, I think there are different appeals processes that you're referring to. I'm referring to an amendment that was added to House Bill 974 this year that would allow for, if a teacher were rated ineffective on their observation but highly effective in their student achievement gains, within 30 days they would be able to request 30 school days. They'd be able to request that an observer come to observe them. A team of observers is appointed by the superintendent to validate or invalidate the rating, and that would have to happen within 30 school days. So if that were to happen in the following fall, then that would be able to happen. I do think that it is, in my professional opinion, almost inconceivable that a teacher would achieve in the top 10% in terms of student gains, but for some reason would be rated in the bottom 10% from an observation perspective, but we wanted to put in place a safeguard.
And the team of observers is appointed by the superintendent?
Correct.
Not the principal?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Bradford has a
Madam Chair,
question.
as a former administrator, I want to tell you that if I go in and a teacher has been teaching children and they are learning, then that's the most important criteria for a principal, because in this new system, the principal will also be evaluated, as I understand it, on student improvement. So we're all in the same boat and hopefully pulling in the same direction, which is, I think, the point.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bradford. Ms. Vester, did you have another comment?
I think she covered it. I think the principal, under this evaluation, the principal will actually have discrete, evidence that of how well that teacher is doing, and the idea that would not impact the observation and the evaluation, the subjective part of that evaluation, I think is absurd. And then, given that the principal's evaluations are based on student achievement, it is in her or his best interest to keep a highly effective teacher in his school, because believe me, other principals are going to want her. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, so we have a motion and a second, so all in favor of the
Aye.
motion? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes, and we're on for the next item, Ms. Bridget.
The next item is 4.1 on page 27, consideration of a records review regarding the issuance of a Louisiana teaching certificate appropriate to the credentials of Mr. Carlos Patton. And board members, I will remind you that you received a separate packet concerning items for this item.
Okay, so we need a motion? We do?
I have a question for the staff. Madam, may I? What are the possible actions for the board on this item?
Ms.
Ms.
Shahan?
Dastig, the possible options are to either approve his request for issuance of a certificate or deny the request.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.
And my second question was, has this individual been before the board before, and what action did the board take?
No, ma'am, he's never
It
been
never
before
been,
the
okay,
board.
thank you.
Is he here
I
to
don't
speak
see
today?
him present today, but he has been notified that this would be considered.
Okay, so you were presented, we as a board
Okay.
received the documentation.
Mhm.
So our position today is either to consider the item. We
To
need a
deny it
motion.
or to issue
To-
it?
to-
Two
yeah.
options.
So
Madam
we
Chair,
need, yes.
wouldn't the decision today be to either agree to have a hearing or not have a hearing?
No, sir. Effective March 20th, the policy's changed. We no longer consider hearings.
Oh.
We just conduct our records review in one
Okay, okay.
motion, and then this action will be final. So whatever you decide today, the only recourse this individual has is to, through a court of law.
Okay, so I need a motion to either accept or deny.
I have some questions.
Well, we need a motion and a second for discussion.
We need a motion to
Yeah,
have
we need
the
a motion
discussion.
and second for discussion.
I'll make a motion that we deny.
Okay,
second.
we have a motion and a second. So, discussion. Mr. Rowan?
Do we know, was he unable to be here today, or do we have any?
It was my understanding that he was going to be present. I talked with him several times. I'm not sure why he's not here. And he's been sent notification, if you see on page 43 and 44, he was notified that this would be considered.
I didn't notice him going through the backup. Has he paid any of the restitution?
Not to my knowledge, but I'm not positive of that. At
Well,
the
in the
time of
information-
his, at the time of his release from parole, he had not, which is on page,
And that was my concern, Mr. Rowan.
yeah, and that's on page, attachment 5, which is,
So we have a motion and a second. We need action. All in favor? The motion to deny.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion carries.
That completes your agenda for educator effectiveness.